On this national day, when a Viking remnant forms the centrepiece of things, one central question still remains. Why didn't the Romans come here? And leave us something for the tourists, a stone road perhaps running through and up and over the hills. The remnant of some simple fort or forts, with traces of stables and toilets and barracks, with soldiers offering protection from the rampaging and woe-daubed hairy men from the north, from Andros and Derby, who might come at night shouting and crying out in a strange language. An aqueduct or two. But you might say that's all water over the bridge. They didn't come, and our island story, our tourist offering, is perhaps the poorer for it. But why didn't they come? Well, quaere feminae, look for the woman in question being Boudica, or Boadicea as we used to know her before we got all serious about correct pronunciations. The Roman general Suetonius Paulinus had conquered Anglesey, in the main to do away with this stronghold of that very influential body, the Druids. But no sooner had he achieved that bit of housekeeping, you know how it is, but Boadicea led a revolt in the south and started burning towns and slaughtering people, all very unsociable, though she would argue the Romans had given her cause. So Paulinus was off, Roman in the gloam, and he was off down there, but even after defeating the lady and her thousands, tens of thousands of followers, he had no time or, indeed, inclination to visit the northwest again. But had the Roman army made it across, we might have enjoyed the logistical organisation that other conquered provinces received. Roads, bridges, aqueducts, forts. No, we didn't get the Romans, but after waiting a bit, we did get the Northmen. The Vikings, and the most visible thing they left with us is celebrated today, here at St. John's, the gathering, the Thingvalla, or gathering field that is Tynwald, and here at the centre of things, Tynwald Hill. For one day a year, that's the most obvious thing the Vikings left, a form of meeting place which gripes and grudges and laws could be broadcast to the eager nation and settled, or more accurately, the most physical thing that the Vikings left us, because they did leave something else which we use every day and may not even know it. Language. With me is Lewis Foster, my colleague, who he looks like the sort of chap who could come off the front of a long ship, waving his battle axe and storming up the shore. He's got that look about him, haven't you?
Haven't shaved for a few days, so yeah.
Have you ever dreamed about doing that?
Yes, I have. Yeah. My hometown is Scunthorpe, or Escumusthorpe it used to be, so very north.
In Viking,
yeah, in
so
Viking
you know
times.
that?
So yeah,
Oh right.
it's
So
in my roots.
does Scunthorpe actually go on about its Viking roots quite a bit?
There are a few bits around and about, yeah, but it's a mixed place as well, so you have to look for it.
Well, the first word that I've selected is particularly apt. What is it?
Berserk.
Now, that's a great word. I love it. Apparently it comes from bear, shirt. Now, this was a chap who basically at the scent of battle used to go absolutely ape and jump off ships with axes and slaughter anything in sight. I suppose it's a terrible image, especially for those at the receiving end.
I think a few people who play video games, the younger generation, will know of berserkers. And typically characters as well known as berserkers. I remember playing a few games growing up, historical games and stuff where you'd have characters like that.
Great word, isn't it? The next word is perhaps something that would accompany a berserker, isn't it?
Yeah, a club.
Now, the Old Norse is klubba. So basically it sounds very much like it might have in the Old Norse, and it means, as you might have thought, a heavy, blunt weapon. And next word?
Ransack.
Ransaka is the Norse, and it means to search a house. And we use that all the time. If you're ransacking a box to look for something,
yeah, and
or ransacking a house.
I suppose it's typically not it sounds like to search, but we typically imagine it as for a thrashing of a house or something, don't we? When a burglar's been in or something like that.
But when it goes into the Old Norse, it's that edge to it, isn't it? Ransaka.
Yeah.
Berserker. It just has that sort of hard edge to it. And this word, the next word,
Slaughter.
slatra, and it means to butcher. So that has, I suppose, a direct meaning to the Norse. It would mean basically, I don't know if it means to butcher animals, to eat, or to butcher human beings.
Something a bit more sinister, yeah.
Interesting word here, this word I've chosen.
Yeah, quite different to the ones we've said so far. Litmus.
It comes apparently from litmusi, which comes from two words which mean dye and moss. But you wouldn't have thought litmus came from that, but that's where it comes from. Another word has a sort of festive ring about it.
Yule.
Which comes from, now this is Jol, so it's probably pronounced Yol, I would imagine, with a soft J. And this is a pagan winter solstice feast. So this has come directly from the Vikings, basically. I presume, I don't know if they had Christmas trees and things.
Or would have a Yule log.
I mean, suddenly, it would add a whole new ambience to it if your longship appeared over the horizon with a Christmas tree on its prow. And,
particularly.
They came ashore bearing presents. And this one, which has to do with winter as well, this next word.
Yeah, skate.
Which is scatter, which is actually, it's not skating about on ice, it's a kind of fish. It's a skate, as we know it today. And a couple more, three more, which sort of have a connection if you put them all together. This next one is quite near to what it is now, to what we would recognise.
Yeah, something I use quite a lot, actually. Dregs.
Dreg is the Old Norse, and it's sediment. So the dregs at the bottom of a glass, if you drink your glass of wine.
Often say a cup of tea or something like that.
Yeah.
If you've got a split bag or something, you have the dregs at the bottom. That's about how I'd use it.
Deprecating as well, isn't it? It's, the dregs of society. It's a phrase that's used. This next word?
Mire.
Now, this is myrrh. Now, I don't know if it comes anywhere near the myrrh as in the wise men arrived carrying myrrh, but it means bog, basically. And the last one's a good word, this one.
Rotten.
And it comes from the Old Norse word, rotin. So there we have it. Quite a few words, more, obviously, than those ones. Those are an indication of how Viking words, Viking terminology, basically has survived, although we don't really recognise it, until this time, down through the ages. The Vikings didn't give us an awful lot. The Romans left an awful lot. The Vikings didn't leave an awful lot, but they did leave us our language. And they do say, as goes the language, so goes the country. So the language is desperately important to us here in the Isle of Man. So when you use words like berserker and slaughter, recall the words antecedents. I suppose when the Norsemen landed and made contact with the indigenous population, communication of some sort would have been very important, even if it was, "OK, boys, we give in." Some years before, raiders from the sea had arrived in Lindisfarne, after perhaps hearing of the valuable objects owned by the monks, which were there for the taking, and take them they did. But when word spread of that massacre, and it was a pretty awful massacre, probably exaggerated, though maybe it didn't have to be, it would have given any sight of a sail, or sails, unidentified, coming from the east, a terrifying aspect. Back then, the glimpse of sails on the horizon probably would have caused panic. There may have been some resistance, but in the main, there would have been little to stop the invaders charging up the shingle beach. Their progress would have been inexorable, unstoppable. They were fighting men up against the villagers, fishermen. The Norsemen stretched their ambitions towards Europe and also to the west. The Isle of Man was in an ideal position to profit from trade between Ireland and the Scottish Islands. It was on the sailing route between Scandinavia and Ireland, and as today, it's a green and pleasant land, ideal for farming and settlement, very alluring to the new arrivals. And arrive is what the Vikings did, we believe, for the first time here in 798. The Norwegians were thought to come down the Western Isles, while the Danes came down the eastern coast of Britain. We still find in common use the Norwegian terms fell, garth and gill on this side of Britain. They soon found a small islet just off the west coast of Peel, ideal to develop as a fortified base. That became, of course, Peel Castle. As they consolidated control, they brought their system of parliament, or tings. There were tings already elsewhere, the Tingvillia and the Log Ting in the Faroes. Ting means assembly, a gathering in which laws were made official. And ignorance of the laws wasn't an excuse. The people were expected to be at these assemblies and therefore be aware of any laws that might apply to them. Much is made of the reaction of those on the receiving end of this violent Viking expansion, but one would imagine it must have been quite an experience for those who had rowed round the north of Scotland, and some have tried to see what that was like. We'll hear from one later, one of the crew of the Odin's Raven that came from Norway to this island 40 years ago. But what was these Vikings' initial impression of this island? I am in a somewhat smaller craft than the dragon ship. I am sitting in a kayak and I'm below the cliffs that run from Bradda Head through to Fleshwick around the corner from Port Erin. Today it's blue skies and a breeze, the sea's a little choppy, and a bit of a swell crashing waves against the rocks. But when these cliffs up above my head, and they come magnificent, are shrouded in mist, they look truly forbidding, truly scary. Those newly arrived wouldn't have known much about this place apart from talks they'd heard. They didn't know who the inhabitants were, what they wore like. Was there a beach where they could draw their boats up? If the fog was down, they would have been groping their way carefully up this coast. The crew, we get the impressions they were all fearless. Well, one or two might have been those that were left a little option, but to leave home as there was no real place for them there. There was no land for them to farm. They had to go and look for somewhere else. They may have been deeply apprehensive, scared even. Yes, scared probably. This is a mighty place. The cliffs are ponderous in their mass. The grasses come tumbling down their side. Presumably, they're much the same as they would have been then. There would have been as there are now. Seals! They're over there. There are guillemots. There's a group of them over there on the water. Basking sharks. I haven't seen any today. Probably they were around. Even whales, orcas, and lots of fish.
What is a woman that you forsake her, and thou fire and thou make her to go with the old grey widowmaker? She has no house to lay her guest in, but one shall bed for all to rest in, that the pale suns and the stray birds nest in.
What was it like to sit in an open vessel for weeks in a sometimes violent sea? Well, a group of Manx and Norwegians know, because they came together for the Manx Millennium in 1979, sailing a 2/3 replica of the Godstad vessel from Norway to the island. Robin Bigland, the inspiration for the extraordinary voyage, was in the crew.
Everything we had to do was to be done in front of everybody else in the crew. Obviously, because there's no cover, it's a rowing boat. So in order to get over that problem, they told us that we should in fact train naked, because that got over any embarrassment that people might feel about, because you were concentrating on the training and getting the job done. And so, the fact you were doing it naked was really irrelevant. I don't suppose that galley slaves bothered much about the fact that they were naked when they were changed, when they just got on with rowing. So, it was just a sensible thought, because, you understand that all bodily functions and things have to be completed in front of other people. But if you don't make sure that, you keep yourself okay in that respect, you'll get ill. So, we were 31 nights at sea. So, you have to be sure that you train properly, and nobody better than the SBS to do that and train you.
So when you set off, did the romance fall away quite quickly and you sort of turned into mission mode, if you will, and started focusing on what you had to do?
You're damn right it fell away quickly, because we were, no sooner had we got down the fjord from Trondheim to the open sea, we got about 20 miles out. And the only vessel we saw really on the voyage practically obviously, because we're very low in the water, you don't see very far, was a fishing boat that came across to us, offered us some fish, and told us that they had a couple of sister ships that were making haste to get back to a place called Öresund, around Stadt Point, and because there was a very large storm coming, and we were heading straight into it, so we didn't know that that was the case, albeit we'd taken obviously we tried to get some weather condition information. But, things were not like they are today. You couldn't just use your whatever equipment such as we have today. All we had was a compass, which is basically what the Vikings had in effect. They had a lodestone that would point north. And anyway, we hurried into Öresund and rode out, were able to ride out the storm there, but it was a serious one. So yes, we were pretty quickly disabused of any romantic visions of sailing into the sunset and all that kind of stuff.
While for most people the Viking connection on the island is a sort of miasma in the background to parts of their life, to others it's a great deal more. At Peel's May Fire Festival, Eve Olden, I found some locals who've taken the Viking connection very seriously, not only for the day, but in their lives generally.
Timold is based on the Vikings arriving on the Isle of Man. It's how we came to have a lot of our laws that we have today. Through the Battle of Sky Hill and obviously Godric Crovan that came to the Isle of Man.
So when did you start doing this?
I'm about 3 years into this now. Bit of a late bloomer. I went down to Timold Day where we are every year and...
something clicked?
I just said next year I want to do that. So I started going along and joining in.
Did you know anything about the Vikings before that?
I've always had a bit of a keen interest. Obviously it was something that I was drawn to naturally, and then I decided to take a next step and start doing the living history side of it.
You've got the beard, you've got the long hair.
I didn't
Did
when
you
I
have
started.
that beforehand?
No.
So you grew that specially?
Much to my wife's disappointment, she's not a fan of the beard or the hair, but...
What are the Vikings, what did they do for us apart from give us a form of government?
We've got lots of different things that came through the Vikings. So we've got some of the technologies that we've got today through boat building.
As seafarers, they were extraordinary.
And of course, yes.
They just pointed the prows of their longships at the horizon, and they never knew what was over the horizon in some cases.
The technology of the boats, the hulls were so shallow that they were able to go into shallower water, which allowed them to get up into canals and streams, where bigger boats from different cultures weren't able to previously.
Can I ask you, sir?
Yep.
You're also dressed up as a Viking. Would you have liked to have been a Viking?
I would have liked to have lived in the area, in the era.
It was a bloody time, wasn't it? You had to be...
It was a bloody time for everybody. When you actually look at a historical record, they say, oh, the Vikings were pirates, but so were the Franks, so were the English, so were the Irish. So there isn't that much difference in the violence. It's just...
Yeah, ask the priests on Lindisfarne in 793.
Well, that is the other thing. You see a lot of the Vikings didn't have what we would look at as a written history. They had the runes, but mostly it was an oral history. So when the oral history was snuffed out with the coming of Christianity in the Scandinavian region, the only written history was by the guys they beat up.
Our side, yes.
Yeah, was by the monks who said, well, they're not very nice. They've come and hurt us.
Mind you, it was fairly accurate that they did do terrible things on Lindisfarne.
They did do terrible things. One of the big discussion points about why the Viking era erupted is just before it did, there was a large massacre of Saxons in Germany by Charlemagne. And the Saxons were very close, almost cousins to the Vikings.
Charles the Great. So this was retaliation of some sort?
They seem to think it might have been. I'm not saying it is. I'm not a historian. But what the Scandinavians saw was they're a much better army. If they've done this to our cousins, they're coming for us. So we're going to turn to some sort of guerrilla warfare. And we will attack what is dear to them. So they took out the churches. And when they got there, they realised how much gold and silver there was there. They thought, well, this is a good thing. Because the interesting thing is, if you read some of the Irish annals, where they attacked the monasteries there, they didn't destroy them. They robbed them, but they left them going. Because they knew if they come back in 5 years, they're still there, so they can do it again.
A wonderful history they've left us here on the island, haven't they?
Absolutely. The island's caked in Viking history through names of places as well. Obviously, Laxey, the Salmon River, is a Viking term. We've also got
Rumsey as well.
Rumsey, yeah, absolutely. But obviously, Viking castles as well. Some of the structures we got on the Isle of Man, certainly Castle Rushen, the inner circle of Castle Rushen was Viking, and it kind of expanded as the years went on.
Is there many of you, by the way?
I think there's about 40 of us on the Isle of
40
Man.
on the island.
Yeah.
You belong to a society you meet or what?
So there's a larger society which is based in the UK, and they have people from all over the world, Poland, Finland, Denmark. We're actually having a massive festival this year, the largest there's ever been in the UK in June, and it's called the Battle of a Thousand Spears. And I mean that's not an actual battle that happened. This is us having fun after the COVID pandemic shut us down for a couple of years. So
this is a reenactment of what might have happened.
absolutely,
at that time.
yeah. But we do the reenactments of things like Stamford Bridge, Hastings, and that's all done through the National Heritage in the UK.
Harold Hardrada, of course, is the great Viking leader. You haven't given yourself a Viking name, have you?
Yeah. So Torleif Gradak is my Viking
What
name.
does that mean?
So Torleif is descendant of Thor, and
The god Thor.
the god Thor.
That's a modest start.
Well, you've got to start somewhere, haven't you? And Gradak is actually the Celtic derivative of my surname. So my surname's O'Grady, and it was pronounced Gradak back in the Celtic times. So I've
when you
combined
come to
both.
these, do you actually live the Viking as a Viking? Do you feel to be a Viking?
Absolutely. When we set up a village, like small villages and things, we live completely authentically. So that's eating authentically, drinking authentically. We drink mead that we brew ourselves, and we have little competitions
What's the strength
internally.
of that? Curiosity.
Depends on how you make it. So I think the last batch I made was about 15.5%.
Well, it's fairly adequate.
It'll knock you down.
What's your name? What's your Viking name?
Storskoring Langstein.
Go on, what does that mean?
That means huge, long stone.
I was getting worried
Standing
there a bit.
stones.
I was
The
getting
big
a bit
standing
worried
st-
there. That's a magnificent name. How did you come across it?
The wife gave it to me.
Oh, really?
I'm into megalithic architecture as well, so she said, well, just have a huge big stone. And it works out as Storskoring Langstein.
Do you think we on the island have enough of these occasions, appreciate what the Vikings did for us enough?
No, I think is the answer.
That's a simple answer, that isn't it? We'd like to do more.
We'd like to do more.
Like what? Can you think of anything?
Knock over a church or two. No, education. School trips. Stuff.
I'd like us to have our own longhouse dedicated place where we could turn up
Yes.
and have our
And
meetings.
there's nothing like that on the island. Not a permanent.
Not currently.
structure.
No.
There's been talk, hasn't there?
There's been talk of one, and there's also I think a private one being built somewhere up north in Derby. And I believe he's going to be doing educational walks through there, but I'm not too sure how in detail he's gone into the
I
authenticity
mean,
side.
something like
of
in
it.
York, where of course you can actually smell the atmosphere if you go through the exhibition there. We don't have anything like that in the island, but that would be a good idea.
Absolutely, and that's what I like about the Tynwald Festival. When we have the Viking village at Tynwald, you go down, you can smell the fire, you can smell everything that we got going on, all the
Smell
foods
the food
and
cooking, and it's takes you back. It gives you an idea of what it was like.
On the seafront of Peel, you don't meet many people with Danish ancestry, but with me is
Michael Gudrum.
Gudrum, and that's what does that name mean, Michael?
It means battle dragon, and it was the title given to the leader of the Viking raiding boats. So he was the person who put together the raiding party, and then they normally shared the spoils between them when they went back.
Can you trace your ancestry right back?
Absolutely, right back to the original Guthrum, and it got anglicised, and in Old Norse it was like a hard, a soft T, Guth, but it got changed to good.
Gudrum.
Yeah, I even know how the spelling got changed, because the D looks like the Old Norse letter F, which is TH, but it looks like a D.
Have you studied other aspects of Viking life?
Well, only in that I know about the original Guthrum, who led the great Danish army in the 9th century into East Anglia from Denmark, and caused quite a stir, actually. got into a battle with a guy called Alfred the Great and unfortunately got beat.
Came off the worst.
Yeah.
You sound proud of your ancestry.
Only because I suppose it's an unusual name. Wherever I go, people say, "Oh, there's only two of you in the telephone book," or something like this. About 50 years ago, I had a company trace the origin of the name and where all the people who've got the same name are now around the world. And there's a huge concentration where the original Gudrun settled in mid-Suffolk, which is where my father came from.
Are there other Gudrums on the island?
There was when I had the book done 40 years ago, but not now.
The book?
Yeah, I had this book published, researched of where everyone with the same name was in the world, so I could find out. I had a map of where all the relatives actually were.
So you are proud. You don't put on the old helmet with the, well, they say horns on occasion. You don't put that on.
That was a myth.
That was a myth.
They never had the horns.
It was just pictured, I think, in one illustration, and that it took off after that.
Well, it looked good, but no.
Are you tempted to put the costume on and go down and join the other fellas on the beach?
No, not really. Maybe when I was 50 I would have done it. In fact, I did have lots of friends who actually ran a company that did battle reenactments, and we used to have parties in my garden where we actually did these battle reenactments, and that was quite fun.
The Manx experience of the Vikings is a blend of fact, as near as we can establish that fact, and folklore. The history of Godred Crovan, King Orry, is predominant. Culture Vannin suggests that his position as a big man, in figurative terms, became associated with him being literally big, a giant. They relate the story of him hurling a rock from North Barul into Bulgham Bay. Apparently the rock made its way back up North Barul 3 times before, after being thrown a 4th time, coming to rest in the sea. And Culture Vannin also suggests he and Manannan have become intermingled. The best-known legend is that when he landed at the Len means the trench in Manx, he was asked by the locals where he was from. He pointed to the Milky Way. Now, the Milky Way was the waymarker used by Norsemen when they were navigating at sea. So the Milky Way in Manx became Radmor Rigori, King Orry's big road. A maquette, a small model of a proposed statue of him pointing up, exists, looking for someone or some people to provide the wherewithal, the cash for a full-scale statue. It would be magnificent, of the grandeur we lack in most of our statues on the Isle of Man. There's another subject that could give the island a great landmark, but more on that later. So the Vikings, nosing their way round the coast to the Irish Sea, arrived here at the island. The Isle of Man has given itself an ambitious target of 500,000 visitors a year. If it is to pursue such ambition, it would do well, perhaps, to exploit the Viking connection. Just have a look at Netflix and those other channels to see the current attraction of the Northmen. Do we do our Viking antecedents justice? The Tynwald ceremony may have been brought over by the Northmen, but these days it's very much an English ceremony. Formal wear by MHKs, MLCs, and those taking part. Ceremony is king. Here's a thought. Perhaps after each new law is read out and promulgated, all present, on the hill, and indeed off, should throw their hats into the air and cheer, or throw their arms into the air and say hurrah. Perhaps also on the hill present should be someone, a giant in size, dressed in Viking garb, with a 2-bladed axe, a he or a she perhaps, in these times of equality, and should occasionally grimace and sneer at the crowd and issue a threat, brandishing that axe, rather more effective than suggesting that the court is now fenced. Godred Crovan fought with the army of Harold Hardrada, this we know, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. That was the one fought by Harold Godwinson, Harold King of England, before he'd heard that William the Bastard of Normandy had rather sneakily landed in the south of the country, pursuing his claim to the English throne. After Hardrada's defeat, Crovan fled to the Isle of Man, where he had relatives, and then he disappeared for a decade, before reappearing to take control of the island after the Battle of Skye Hill in 1079. I mentioned earlier about another subject for a statue that would, I feel, impress visitors and bring pride to the heart of islanders. Now, there's a portrait in government offices of, it's either King Orry or Manannan. It was conceived as a statue, but it never happened. How many things has that happened to in the island? I have proposed to many people that we place this statue once built of this god or king, holding his axe, all bearded and fierce, on a tall plinth on the roundabout next to Parade Street car park, which is currently occupied by a pretty unexciting cannon and some balls. On the plinth would be written in English and Manx, "Come on if you think you're tough enough." The statue would be uplit at night, one of the most effective ways of improving the look of a building or statue, and would be one of the first things visible to visitors as they came out of the sea terminal. It would have the "gosh, look at that" factor, and it would be a very useful statement of the Manx view of its neighbours.